to have Dr. Ben Carson with us tonight. He's founder and chairman of the American Cornerstone Institute. He most recently served as 17th Secretary of the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development. For nearly 30 years, Dr. Carson served as Director of Pediatric Neurosurgery at the Johns Hopkins Children's Center. And if I took all the time to read and share all the other honors and awards, well, it would take up too much of his time to speak. We're just honored to have you, brother, and so thank you for being willing to share. We want to have a prayer over you as you speak, okay? Let's pray. Father in heaven, we're grateful to be together tonight. Father, we do love our nation. Thankful, Father, for Dr. Carson, what he's done to help our nation and inspire so many people. Bless him tonight as he shares. In Jesus' name, amen.
Well, Candy and I are absolutely delighted to be here today. We had a wonderful time this morning and last night with the Robertsons. Got a chance to experience Louisiana, including getting stuck in the mud on an all-terrain vehicle and using the wrench to pull you out. I mean, it's really cool. It doesn't get better than that, you know. Can't pay for an adventure like that. You know, everybody makes disclaimers these days. They say, you know, I sit on this board, I'm involved with this organization, so you have to take everything I say with a grain of salt. I have a disclaimer that I need to make, and my disclaimer is that I am not politically correct. So, now, that doesn't mean that I'm mean. That doesn't mean that I try to offend people. It just means that I don't tie myself into a pretzel trying to make sure that you don't offend somebody, because some people are offended by everything. And, you know, it's kind of ridiculous how we've gotten. It's almost like you're living in an alternate universe. You see people running around complaining about the simplest of things, and logic and common sense seems to have lost us. Wrong is right, right is wrong. But we don't have to accept that, because this is America, and it's up for and by the people. And we are the people, and we get to decide. And, you know, isn't it wonderful, for instance, that the Supreme Court yesterday recognized that it's the people? Yeah. And that's the way our system was designed. It was designed so that major life-altering decisions would lay in the hands of the people and their elected representatives, and not unelected justices. So, you know, this is the fairest outcome. We still have, obviously, a lot of work to do, because God expects us to speak up for those who cannot speak for themselves. And who characterizes that more than the unborn? I remember some years ago, I was in South Africa at a conference, Academy of Achievement, and one of the speakers was the head of the ACLU. And he was talking about how the ACLU is such a wonderful organization, and how they speak for those who cannot speak for themselves, the helpless, the voiceless. And he was quite an eloquent speaker. And at the end, at question and answer session, I stood up and I said, you know, a lady recently came to me. She was 33 weeks pregnant. She was on her way to Kansas to get an abortion because the child had been diagnosed with a neurological condition, and it was recommended that she get an abortion. That was the only place in the country that would do an abortion that late, 33 weeks, because that baby would be viable outside of the womb without support. So I fortunately was able to talk the lady out of getting the abortion, and was able to operate on her child. And it was successful, and she loves that baby, and she's very glad she didn't get the abortion. But I said to him, will you speak for that baby? That baby was about to be killed, has no voice. Would you speak for that baby? And he hemmed and he hawed and he dodged and he weaved, but he would never answer the question. So later on that evening at dinner, he had the misfortune of sitting next to me. And I said, let's continue the conversation. And I said, let's make it easy for you. I say, I operate sometimes on little babies that are 26, 27, 28 weeks gestation. Less developed than the one that we were talking about. I said, could you speak for those babies? He said, oh, absolutely. I said, but the one who's several weeks more advanced and is in the safest place they can be in the universe, you can't speak for that one? And he said, I realize that doesn't make any sense, but I believe a woman has the right to kill that baby until the second it is born. And I said, would you say that in public? And he said, no. Today, they will say it in public. That's how much we have deteriorated. And it tells you why we need to fight. You know, Proverbs 24, 11 and 12 says, for those who are being drawn unto death, did you say anything? Did you do anything? And does not he that knows and sees everything, does he not know whether you did something? So we do have a responsibility for those who can't help themselves. And we have to make America a desirable place. Do you know that America is the only nation that has a dream? The American dream? There's no Russian dream. There's no French dream. There's no Canadian dream. They thought there was until recently they found out that there's no dream there either. But we're the only place that has a dream, a beacon, a city on the hill that provides so much promise for people from around the world. My American dream was to be a doctor. I loved anything that had to do with medicine. And initially, I wanted to be a missionary doctor. I would hear the mission stories in church and Sabbath school, and they just seemed so fascinating. These people, great personal sacrifice, traveling all over the world to bring not only physical but mental and spiritual healing to people. They seemed to me like the most noble people on the face of the earth. So I decided when I was 8 years old that I would be a missionary doctor. And that was my dream until I was 13, at which time, having grown up in dire poverty, I decided I'd rather be rich. So at that point, missionary doctor was out and psychiatrist was in. Now, I didn't know any psychiatrists, but on TV, they seemed like rich people, you know. They lived in these big fancy mansions, and they drove Jaguars, and they had these big plush offices. And all they had to do was talk to crazy people all day. Seemed like I was doing that anyway. So I said, this is going to work out extremely well. And I started reading Psychology Today. I was a local shrink in high school. Everybody brought me their problems. I would sit them down and stroke my chin, say, tell me about your mama. And I majored in psychology in college, had some incredible professors like Anna Freud, the daughter of Sigmund Freud, and people like that. And I was all gung-ho when I got to medical school, did advanced psych. But then I started meeting a bunch of psychiatrists. Need I say more? Just kidding. Some of my best friends are psychiatrists. But you know, but what really fascinated me were the neurosurgeons when they started talking about the things that they could do with the human brain. I was just captivated by those things, and I started moving in that direction. And a lot of people discouraged me. They said, no, you don't want to do a neurosurgery. At that time, there had only been 8 black neurosurgeons in the world. But I'll tell you a secret, God does not dispense talent based on race. And, you know, I just took to neurosurgery like a duck to water. No reference to you, Phil. And it just seemed like such a natural thing for me. And I started out as an adult neurosurgeon. But I quickly learned that no matter how good an operation you did on those chronic back pain patients, they never got any better until they got their settlement. Whereas with the kids, what you see is what you get. When they feel good, you know they feel good. When they feel bad, you know they feel bad. And with a kid, you can operate for 10, 15, 20 hours. And your reward may be 50, 60, 70, 80 years of life. Whereas with an old geezer, you spend all that time operating and they die of something else in 5 years. So I like to get a big return on my investment. I'm just kidding, I like old people. I'm one of them now. But I was the kind of student, and if you'd saw me as a youngster, you would have said, this guy, a doctor, you gotta be kidding me. I was a terrible student, probably one of the worst students you could possibly imagine. Everybody thought I was stupid, except my mother. My mother was always saying, Benjamin, you're much too smart to be bringing home grades like this. I brought them home anyway, but she was always saying that, and she was always being encouraging. And she just didn't know what to do. The other students just teased me mercilessly. They called me all kinds of names. I tried to act like it didn't bother me, but it really did. But I was really good at getting back at them. I knew how to exact revenge because I would study my classmates and I would figure out what made them really, really angry. And then I would just irritate them until they were about to explode. But I would never push the last button to make them explode until we were in class and the teacher was nearby. And then they would explode and the teacher would kick them out of the classroom. And I would say, yeah, this is great, because I wouldn't be the only one who didn't learn anything that day. But there was this one girl. And now some of you know this girl. Some of you probably were this girl. Miss Goody Two-Shoes. You know what I'm talking about? Everything perfect, pristine, made everybody else look like a total jerk, everything. I said, wouldn't it be nice to get her kicked out of class? There was only one problem. She was cool, calm, collected. You could not get under her skin. But I was persistent. I kept working at it. I studied it. I finally figured out what it was. And I started on her. She was so mad. I mean, the steam was coming out of her ears. She was about to explode. But I didn't push the last button. I waited till we were in class. Lo and behold, she sat right down in the desk in front of me. I said, the Lord is good. And as the teacher approached, I pushed the last button, but she didn't explode. She just quietly turned around and said, you and me on the playground at recess. So that didn't work out that well. I stopped bothering people after that, by the way. But, you know, my mother was just so concerned because I was a terrible student. My brother was a terrible student. She knew, you know, she had less than a third grade education, got married when she was 13, discovered years later that her husband was a bigamist, had to work as a domestic 2 and 3 jobs at a time, leaving the house at 5 in the morning, getting back after midnight because she didn't want to be on welfare. She didn't want to be dependent on the government. And she wanted something better for us. And she was afraid because of our academic performance or lack thereof that we wouldn't have a life that was better than hers. And she prayed that God would give her wisdom. And she said, these are beautiful homes that I clean. Why are these people so successful? So she started spying on them. And she concluded that it was because they didn't watch a lot of TV and they spent a lot of time reading. So she came home and imposed that on me and my brother. And we were not happy campers. I got to tell you, in today's world, we would have called social services on her. They would have taken her away in handcuffs. But, you know, in those days, you had to do what your parents told you. And, you know, I just did not want to read those books at first. But after a while, I actually began to enjoy reading the books because we were desperately poor. But between the covers of those books, I could go anywhere. I could be anybody. I could do anything. It completely broadened my horizons. And then I started reading about incredible people, entrepreneurs and surgeons and explorers, and engineers and philosophers. And I began to understand a very important truth. And that is that the person who has most to do with what happens to you in life is you. It's not somebody else. It's not some circumstance. I stopped listening to all the naysayers and the people who were saying, you can't do this, you can't do that, and this is in your way, and these people will stop you. I just chucked all of that stuff, started focusing on what I could do. And in the space of a year and a half, I went from the bottom of the class to the top of the class, much to the consternation of many of those people who used to laugh at me and tease me, who are now coming to me and saying, hey, Benny, how do you work this problem? And I would say, sit at my feet, youngster, while I instruct you. I was perhaps a little obnoxious, but it sure felt good to say that to those turkeys. But, you know, I had a complete change in the way that I thought, using that brain. You know, we are made in the image of God. And God is no dummy. God is incredibly intelligent. He gave us these amazingly sophisticated brains. Your brain has billions and billions of neurons, hundreds of billions of interconnections, remembers everything you've ever seen, everything you've ever heard, can process more than 2 million bits of information in 1 second. It's incredible. To give you an example of how sophisticated your brain is, how many people here remember what you had to eat today? Let me just see your hand. Okay, it's almost unanimous. Those who can't remember, I'm sorry. But what did your brain have to do for you to respond to that question? Almost instantaneously. Well, first of all, the sound waves had to leave my lips, travel through the air, enter your external auditory meatus, travel down to your tympanic membrane, set up a vibratory force, which traveled across the ossicles of the middle ear to the oval and round window, set up a vibratory force in the endolimb, which mechanically distorted the microcilia, converting my mechanical energy to electrical energy, which traveled across the cochlear nerve to the cochlear nucleus at the pontomedullary junction, from there to the superior olivary nucleus, ascending bilaterally up the brainstem, through the lateral meniscus to the inferior colliculus and the medial geniculate nuclei, across the thalamic radiations to the posterior temporal lobes, begin the auditory processing, from there to the frontal lobes, coming down the tract of victor, retrieving the memory from the medial hippocampal structure and the mammary bodies back to the frontal lobes to start the motor response at the bet cell level, coming down the cortical spinal tract across the internal capsule into the cerebral peduncle, descending down to the cervical medullary decussation into the spinal gray matter, synapsing there, going out to the neuromuscular junction, stimulating the nerve in the muscle. So you could raise your hand. And that's a simplified version of what your brain had to do in a split second. We are fearfully and wonderfully made. And we need to start thinking about that, you know? Thinking logically and with common sense. Well, you know, you would have thought that everything was going to be fine for me, but I still had another major problem. I had a terrible temper. I would get so angry. It didn't even think about consequences when I would get angry. I remember once a fellow hit me with a pebble. It didn't hurt, but I was incensed that he would dare hit me with a pebble. Picked up a large rock, hurled it at his face, broke his glasses, almost put his eye out. Another time a fellow was trying to close my locker. I didn't want it closed. I hit him in the forehead with my fist. Unfortunately, the lock was still in my hand. Put a 3-inch gash in his forehead. Almost got expelled. My mother was trying to get me to wear something. I didn't want to wear it. Picked up a hammer, went to hit her in the head with it. Fortunately, my brother caught it from behind. Other than that, I was a pretty good kid. But you can see, you can see how that temper could get you into a lot of trouble. And when I was 14, another teenager angered me. I had a large camping knife. I tried to stab him in the abdomen. And fortunately, under his clothing, he had a large metal belt buckle, and a knife blade struck it with such force that it broke. And he fled in terror. But I was more horrified than he was, recognizing that I was trying to kill somebody over nothing. And even though I had turned things around academically, I realized that with a temper like that, I would never become a doctor. My choices would be reform school, prison, or the grave. And none of those appealed to me. And I just locked myself in the bathroom and I started praying. I said, Lord, you know, I've tried to control my temper. I can't do it. I said, unless you control my temper, I'm never going to be successful. And there was a Bible. I picked up the Bible and I opened it to the book of Proverbs. And there were all these verses about anger. Like Proverbs 19:19, it says, there's no point getting an angry man out of trouble. It's just going to get right back into it. But there were encouraging verses like Proverbs 16:32, mightier is the man who controls his temper than the man who can conquer a city. Verse after verse. And then there were all these verses about fools. And it seemed like they were all written about me. And I just said, as I started thinking about it, this is who I am. To change that. And I realized that the reason that I was having so much trouble is because I had the wrong microphone. No, it was because I was selfish. Everything was about me. Me, my, and I. I want this, somebody took my thing. And I realized at that moment that if I could step out of the center of the circle and let it be about somebody else and look at things from other people's points of view, that I wouldn't be angry. And that was the last day that I had an angry outburst. And some people say, you just learned how to hide it. But no, God fixed it. And when he fixes it, he doesn't just do a paint job, he fixes it from within. And people who know me now, they can't even imagine that I used to be angry like that. But that's because God has the ability to change our heart if we just give him the opportunity to do so. And what a difference it makes. Well, that made a big difference in my life. Now it was time to go to college. And, I ended up going to Yale. And that was pretty secular school, even though it started out as a school for ministers, believe it or not. That was their mission. All the Ivy League schools have gone pretty far off the edge now in terms of the way that they try to indoctrinate young people. But there was one really good thing about Yale, and that is I met my wife there, Candy. Can you stand up and let them see you, Candy? We were both from Detroit, but we had to go to New Haven to meet each other. So, but it all worked out extremely well. But, you know, when I got to Yale, I was thinking I was perhaps the smartest person in the world, and if not, certainly in the top 5. It wasn't long before I was severely disabused of that notion. I was wondering why I was there at all. And, you know, but by the end of that first semester, I was in deep trouble, failing chemistry. Now, you can't fail chemistry if you're pre-med, if you're going to go to medical school. And it was the night before the final exam, and I was nowhere close to passing, even if I got a good mark on the final exam, which I was not destined to do. And I said, Lord, I always thought you wanted me to be a doctor. This is what I wanted to do from the time I was 8, but obviously, if I fail chemistry, I'm not getting into medical school, and I'm not going to be a doctor. So what is it that you really want me to do? Or, preferably, work a miracle. Well, it turns out that the professor, the chemistry professor, he was either very kind or very sadistic. I'm not sure which one, because he said, anybody who is failing the class, I will give them double credit on the final exam. So you had this hope, this last hurrah before you went down in flames. And so I was studying that night. I picked up that chemistry book. I was going to read through the entire thick chemistry book. But of course, I fell asleep. And I dreamed I was in an auditorium all by myself with a nebulous figure working out chemistry problems on the blackboard. And I awakened early in the morning, and the dream was so vivid. And I looked up all the stuff that was written on the blackboard. And when I went to take the test the next day and I opened a test booklet, it was like the music from the Twilight Zone, because I recognized the first question as one of the ones I had dreamed about. And the next, and the next, and the next, and the next. And I went right through the exam. I was one of the first people out, aced the exam. And, you know, I said to the Lord after that, I know you want me to go into medicine. I know you have a task for me there. And I will never put you in that position again. And I will begin to study. So, if there are any young people in college out there, don't expect the Lord to do that for you. Although he can, but you can learn from my example and not put yourself in that position in the first place. It'll make a big difference. But when I got to medical school, I said, finally did the last hurdle, but the first set of comprehensive exams I did terribly on. So badly that I had to go see my counselor, the person that they designate to help you get through medical school. And he looked at my record and he said, you seem like a very intelligent young man. I bet there are a lot of things you could do outside of medicine. He tried to convince me to drop out of medical school. Said, you're not cut out to be a doctor. You're just going to torment yourself and everybody else. I was devastated. I went back to my apartment. I just prayed. I said, Lord, show me what I should do. And I started thinking, what kind of courses have you always done very well in? What kind of courses have you struggled in? And I realized I did very well in courses where I did a lot of reading. And I struggled in courses where I listened to a lot of boring lectures, because I don't get anything out of boring lectures. And I was sitting in boring lectures 6 to 8 hours a day, basically wasting my time. So I made an executive decision to skip the boring lectures and to spend that time reading. And the rest of medical school was a snap after that. And years later, when I was back at my medical school as the commencement speaker, I was looking for that counselor because I was going to tell him he wasn't cut out to be a counselor. Because, you know, there are so many people who are just negative. They can always tell you why something doesn't work and why you're going to be a failure at something. What if they spent half the time trying to help people and trying to be encouraging to people, and particularly to young people? And by the way, if there are any young people in college who just listened to that story, the moral of the story is not skip your lectures. The moral of the story is learn how you learn. Everybody learns differently, and the sooner you learn how you learn, the quicker you can arrange things in such a way that you take advantage of that. It makes a really big difference. Well, you know, I found myself at age 33, chief of pediatric neurosurgery at Johns Hopkins, and all kinds of incredible cases. Started doing hemispherectomies, got a lot of national attention, an operation where you take out half the brain to stop intractable seizures. And I was doing all kinds of amazing things, and one of the OBGYN doctors came to me and he said, "Ben, I have a woman who's pregnant with twins. And one of the twins has a severe case of hydrocephalus. And the head is growing so rapidly that it's threatening premature labor. And both twins will be lost because their lungs are too immature to survive even with maximum support." And he says, "You know, I know you have a reputation for doing unusual things. Do you think you could figure out something that you could do for that baby and for both babies?" And I was aware of an article in the New England Journal of Medicine that had come out a few weeks before that, talking about intrauterine surgery and how it was a thing of the future, that we weren't ready to do it yet. And yet, here was a case where these two babies' lives were at stake. So I was aware of a pediatric neurosurgeon in Philadelphia who was doing some experimental work on intrauterine surgery in sheep. So I contacted him and said, "You think we could very quickly modify what you're doing to make it something we can use in a human being?" And we did. Within like 2 or 3 days, we were able to get that done. But Johns Hopkins wouldn't let me do the operation because the internal review board said, you know, this is too experimental. We can't do something like that at the hospital. So we went to a community hospital that didn't have an internal review board. And we did the operation there. And I remember, you know, looking at the ultrasound screen, and you could see as we did the procedure, the head just shrink down. And we were able to buy several more weeks of development time so that the lungs could develop. And when the babies were delivered, it was a big national news story. And I remember my brother called me from Georgia. He said, "I just saw you on the national news." But there was a lot of criticism at first that this was inappropriate, it was too risky, it shouldn't have been done. That is, until it was discovered that not only was the normal baby okay, but the hydrocephalic baby was okay too. And then all the critics were saying, "Well, I would have done that too under those circumstances." That's sort of the way those kinds of things work. But what really had an impression on me was a young man from Georgia. He was a child prodigy. At age 2, he was already reciting Bible verses. But by age 4, he lost all of those abilities. He couldn't walk anymore. He had double vision. He was having all kinds of problems, and he was diagnosed with a malignant brainstem tumor, an inoperable tumor for which there was no therapy. And they saw multiple specialists around the country, and everybody said the same thing. And they ended up at Johns Hopkins. And I remember seeing that boy roll onto the ward on a stretcher, barely moving, barely breathing, foaming at the mouth, eyes looking in different directions. And I was thinking, what am I supposed to do here? And I looked at the CAT scan, and there was this big, ugly brainstem tumor. And the parents said, "Doctor, we were directed here by the Lord because we would find a Christian pediatric neurosurgeon, and through him, the Lord would heal our son." And I said, "I'm sorry, but this is an inoperable brainstem tumor. There's nothing I or anyone else can do." And they said, "But doctor, the Lord." And I said, "Okay." I said, "Let's do an MRI." MRIs were brand new at that time. I said, "Maybe it will show us something that the CAT scan doesn't show." We did an MRI, had all the neuroradiologists look at it. They all said the same thing: malignant, inoperable brainstem tumor. I told the parents, and they said, "But doctor, the Lord." I said, "Well, once in 1,000 cases, the scans are wrong, and it's a misdiagnosis. So I'll go in and I'll do a biopsy to make sure that that's what this is." Oh, they said, "Oh, thank you, doctor, thank you so much." And I opened them up, went down to the area of the brainstem, big, ugly, grayish-red mass. I took a section, sent it for frozen, and it came back high-grade glioma, a very malignant tumor. And I took out as much as I dared and then closed them up, went out and talked to the parents, and I said, "Unfortunately, it looks like what we thought it was. And only God knows how long a person is supposed to be here and what their purpose is, and we'll understand it better by and by," all the things that we try to tell people to comfort them. And they said, "Thank you, doctor, but the Lord is going to heal our son. He's going to use you." And as I walked away, I was thinking, I've never seen people with faith like this before. Fully expecting over the next few days that he would deteriorate and die. But over the next few days, something happened. His eyes started looking in the same direction. He started handling his secretions. I said, "What in the world is going on?" And I said, "Let's do another MRI." And we did, and there was still a big, ugly tumor. But you could see way off in the corner a little sliver of tissue. And I said, "Is it possible that this thing is not inside the brainstem, but is actually compressed and displaced the brainstem?" And I said, "Maybe we should go back in." And the parents said, "By all means." And when I went in there under the microscope, the nature of that tumor had changed. And as I peeled it away layer by layer, I got to the last layer, peeled it away, and there was a glistening white brainstem, smashed and displaced but intact. Long story short, the boy walked out of the hospital and is a minister today. And one of the oncologists after that, he said, "Ben, I've always been an atheist, but I'm a believer now." But it wasn't for him, it was for me. Because you see, I thought I was doing all this stuff. I said, "You came out of Detroit, went to Yale, University of Michigan, You're chief of pediatric neurosurgery at the #1 hospital at age 33. You are a bad dude. That's what I was thinking. But after that, I realized that it wasn't me at all, that it was God. And I said, Lord, from now on, you be the neurosurgeon, and I'll be the hands. And that's where the title Gifted Hands came from. It was a gift from God. And once I realized who it was who was doing it, all kinds of amazing things began to happen. I remember there was one case in South Africa. They were conjoined twins. They were joined at the top of the head facing in opposite directions, something we call type 2 vertical craniopicus. There had been 13 attempts to separate twins like that previously, none of which had been successful. And, I was asked, obviously, to lead a team to try to separate them. We had tried to separate some twins in South Africa 3 years before that. It turns out they were symbiotic twins. One of them had all the heart function and one of them had all the kidney function. So they couldn't live together and they couldn't live apart. And I was very depressed after that operation. I said, Lord, anybody could fail. Why do I need to come over here and fail? But in the process of that first failure, we had put together an amazing team and imported equipment that was essential for doing that operation, and it had sat there dormant for 3 years. So we were able to use it for this new operation. And also new technologies had been developed, like virtual surgery, where we could take MRIs and CAT scans and angiograms, integrate them into a 3-dimensional picture, and study the anatomy. So I was able to get all that while I was at Johns Hopkins in Baltimore and study the roadmap. But I couldn't take all that stuff to South Africa. They didn't have the technology to be able to utilize it. So I remember going to the operating room on the day of surgery. There was a big sign over the door that said, God bless Joseph and Luca Banda. And they were having song service and prayer service, and I was thrilled, and I asked them to bring a stereo system in because I like to listen to music while operating. 19 hours into the operation, we reached a point where it looked impossible. There were blood vessels crisscrossing between the two brains. It looked like a bowl of spaghetti. And we had to stop the operation. There was no way to proceed. And, I suggested that maybe we could cover things over with skin, and that over the course of several weeks to a few months, things would clarify and pull to one side or the other side. And the doctors from South Africa and Zambia said, that's a great idea. And I know it would work at Johns Hopkins. But we don't have the ability to keep partially separated twins alive. They'll die. And now I really felt the weight of the world on my shoulders. And I said, Lord, it's up to you. I've reached my extremity. There's nothing I can do. I went back in and started operating. And several hours of intense surgery. And I do not honestly remember what I did. The other neurosurgeons later said, we were watching you. We could not believe what you were doing. But when we made the final cut that separated those two twins over the stereo system came the Hallelujah chorus. And when we finished the operation after 28 hours, one of the twins opened his eyes, reached up for the endotracheal tube. By the time we got to the ICU, the other one did the same thing. Within 2 days, they were extubated. Within 3 days, they were eating. Within 2 weeks, they were crawling. And today, they are perfectly normal adults. And I remember the people were just literally dancing in the streets. This had been done, and this had never been done before. And it was done in their country and in their hospital. And the Lord used that in a mighty way to touch and affect many people. But again, recognizing who it was and where it was coming from. But, you know, with all of the success that I had in medicine, I decided I would retire when I was 61. Why? Because someone had told me that neurosurgeons die early. And I didn't believe it, so I wrote down the name of the last 10 neurosurgeons I knew who died, calculated the average age of death, and it was 61. And I said, so if I'm still alive at 61, I'm retiring. And I did, but I failed retirement because in 2013, I was asked to speak at the National Prayer Breakfast. And I was pretty surprised that they would ask me to speak at the National Presidential Prayer Breakfast, because I had spoken at the Presidential Prayer Breakfast in 1997 when Bill Clinton was president. And I had spoke about integrity. And it was just before the Lewinsky thing broke. And he was probably saying, does he know what's going on? You know, what's going on? But, you know, I really didn't think anybody ever did it twice. But some research revealed the fact that there was one person who did it twice, and that was Billy Graham. And I said, that's pretty good company. So I accepted, and they kept calling me and saying, what are you going to speak about? Because President Obama has to respond. And I said, I don't know what I'm going to speak about. And they said, well, you got to figure it out. And they kept calling, and I kept saying, I don't know. And they say, well, you're not going to embarrass the president, are you? And I said, that's not my intention. And but I didn't know until the morning of the speech what I was going to say. But it struck such a chord. And afterwards, everybody was saying, you should run for president. And I was saying, don't be ridiculous. Why would I do something like that? And I said, if I just ignore these people, it'll go away. But it never went away. It kept growing. People had signs every place I went, run, Ben, run. At more than 500,000 petitions in my office. Could barely get in there with all the boxes. And I finally said, Lord, you know, that's not something that I want to do, but if you really want me to run, you have to give me all the things that a person who runs for president needs. A Rolodex with all the important contacts, an organization, a lot of money. And I said, I'm not going to go out and try to establish those things, so you would have to provide all those things. The next thing I knew, I had an organization. They were raising more money than the RNC each month. It was absolutely ridiculous. But as I traveled around the country during the campaign, what was so amazing to me, in the smallest little hamlets in Mississippi or North Dakota, wherever you went, it was very clear that the American people have common sense. All over this country, not so much in D.C., but everywhere else, they have common sense. And what has been happening is that our people are being manipulated, largely by a media that has forgotten why it is there. The press is the only business that is protected by our Constitution. And the reason for that is because they're supposed to disseminate unbiased information to the populace so that the country can be run on the will of the people. But how can the people know what their will is when they're getting information that is not true? And that has caused a lot of confusion and disorder in our country. And that's actually the reason that when I retired the second time, after the election in 2020, I said, now I can really relax and really become a good golfer and just enjoy life. But you know, it wasn't many weeks after the election that I saw the direction that our country was going in. I said I would never be able to enjoy myself on a golf course watching our country deteriorate like this. So myself and several outstanding individuals from HUD got together and created the American Cornerstone Institute, which is a think tank / do tank, which focuses on those fundamental pillars that helped us to go from a bunch of ragtag militiamen to the pinnacle of the world. It was not a coincidence. It was because of the principles that we espoused, like faith. Think about our faith, our Judeo-Christian values, which taught us to love your neighbor. Now, as we've moved that aside, it's been replaced by something other than love. It's hate. Hate your neighbor if they disagree with you. Cancel your neighbor. Hurt their family. Nothing but pure, unadulterated evil. And we must fight back. And then there's the cornerstone of liberty, which is what this country represented for people from all around the world. A place of freedom, a place where you're not going to have the heavy foot of government on your neck mandating where you could live and how you could live and what you could do and where you could go. That was the promise of America. And we have to make sure that that is still the case. You know, our freedoms are being compromised. Like freedom of speech. Think about it. Some people say, we don't have any compromise over our freedom of speech. The government's not keeping us from saying anything. Well, if big tech and social media can shut you down, can keep you quiet, can cancel you, with the compliance of the government, it's exactly the same effect as if the government was doing it. And we need to understand that so that we can fight appropriately against that. And you know, you can go right through all of our rights and how people are trying to compromise them. You know, you look at those who are trying to take guns away. You know, why do we have the Second Amendment? People say, you don't need a high-powered rifle to go duck hunting or deer hunting. Well, the Second Amendment is not about duck hunting and deer hunting. It's about the ability of the people to protect themselves and their families from criminals or an overly aggressive government. And you can't do that with a pea shooter. So that, you know, we need to really be cognizant of when our liberties are being threatened, and we must fight against that. And then there's the cornerstone of community, such an important factor in the strength of our country. You know, early on there were small communities, 20, 50, 100 families, isolated 50 miles away from anybody else, but they learned to work together. They used their varied skills and talents to work together to create successful communities, which then grew and coalesced. And, you know, if it was harvest time and Mr. Johnson fell out of the apple tree and broke his leg, everybody else harvested his crops. No questions answered or asked, you know, and we took care of each other. And we have got to get back to that once again. You know, we, the American people, are not each other's enemies. The enemies are those who are trying to divide us. They try to divide us on the basis of race and age and income and religion and political affiliation and gender and whatever else that they can do, because the United States of America is too strong to be brought down by China or Russia or North Korea or Iran, but we can be brought down from inside. Jesus said it. He said, a house divided against itself cannot stand. Abraham Lincoln repeated it. It was true then. It's true today. And we must learn to identify who the true enemies are. They are the ones who are trying to divide this nation. And we need to work hard to stop them. You know, it was Nikita Khrushchev, some of you may remember, 60 years ago, he said to Dwight Eisenhower, your grandchildren's children will live under communism, and we won't have to fire one shot. Now, what was he talking about? He knew that the only thing that was necessary is that they would have to gain control of our educational system so that they could indoctrinate the kids, and then gain control of the media so they could spoon feed the people only what they wanted them to know and shield them from what they didn't want them to know. Replace faith in God with faith in government, and raise the national debt to astronomical levels so you could justify massive taxation, redistribution of wealth, and complete dependence on the government. Does any of that sound familiar? It's all the stuff that is going on in our country right now. The only people who can stop it is us. We, the people. The founders of this nation, I believe, were inspired by God. And they recognized that we would reach this point in our nation where our system would be severely threatened. You know, when the Constitution was finished and Benjamin Franklin came out of the Constitution Hall, this is in 1787, a woman said, Mr. Franklin, so what do we have? A monarchy or a republic? And Franklin said, a republic, if you can keep it. If you can keep it. Recognizing that the threats would be there, but they gave us tools to be able to keep it. The Constitution is written in such a way as to be an aid to the people. I think it's a God-inspired document. But they also gave us the vote. And it is so important to understand how valuable that is and to know how to vote. It is critical, and it will make the difference between what happens. Knowing how to vote. You can go to AmericanCornerstone.org, or you can take a picture of the code, the QR code right there, and it'll give you information about how to find out about the people that you're voting for. Because it's so important that their values correspond to your values. Most people don't do that. When they go into the voting booth, they just look for the name that looks familiar. Oh yeah, I know that name. It could be Satan. Yeah, I know that name. In some cases it is. And you know, that's why we keep getting the same stuff. And please promise yourself, take the pledge that you will invest some time and find out who the people are and whether, in fact, their values correspond to your values. That will be the thing that will get us back on the right track faster than almost anything else. And then we also have to make sure that we teach our kids the right kinds of things. You know, at American Cornerstone, we have a part of a program called Little Patriots. And we have books. Why America Matters was our first book. A new book is coming out first week in July called Red, White, and Blue. Our flag matters to me and you. And it helps children to understand what the red, white, and blue is about, what the stars are, what the stripes are, the freedoms that it represents, the people who made it possible for us to live in freedom. And all the proceeds from the book go right back into the program to create more things. There's beautiful cartoons that were created by people we've hired from Pixar and Disney. Unwoke people, by the way, from those places. Beautifully illustrated with lessons, and you have Liberty Eagle to guide them through the programs. And the thing about Liberty Eagle, she's a bald eagle, and she has a left wing and a right wing. Can't fly with two left wings, can't fly with two right wings, can soar elegantly with both wings, because we have to teach our children to stop hating each other and to learn how to work together. It's so important. But all of this is going to require something very special from each one of us. It's called courage. Courage and determination. And I want you to think about World War II. Think about how our young women were able to go into the factories and build more airplanes, tanks, and mortars than anybody could imagine. Think about how our young men from the cities, the suburbs, the rural areas, 17, 18, 19 years old, even 16, a lot of them lied about their age so that they could go and fight for our country. Think about D-Day as they approached the shores of Normandy. And as they got out on the shore and were mowed down by machine gun fire, 100 bodies laying dead in the sand, 1,000 bodies dead in the sand. Were the others afraid? Did they turn back? Yes, they were afraid, but they didn't turn back. They stepped over those dead bodies and they overwhelmed the Axis forces, knowing in many cases they would never see their loved ones or their homeland again. Why? Why did they do it? Not for themselves. They did it for you and for me, so that we could live in freedom and prosperity in this country. And now it's our turn to do it for those who are coming after us. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for being here tonight. Let's dismiss with a word of prayer. Father in heaven, we're grateful. Thank you for bringing Dr. Carson our way. Thank you, Father, for his inspiration, his love for you, his love for this country. I ask that you continue to bless him and his family. In Jesus' name, amen.
One Kingdom is the global missions and relief arm of White's Ferry Road Church. This ministry is partnered with over 100 men and women in upwards of 70 nations. We seek to empower and equip local leaders to share the gospel in every nation and every language. We do that through projects like World Radio, where we share our hope through gospel radio broadcasts all over the globe. Another way we accomplish this goal is by teaching biblical principles through agriculture, which helps to sustain the local economies and stabilize communities in countries like Liberia. One Kingdom also responds to disasters, both domestically and internationally. One of the benefits of having partners around the globe is that when disaster strikes, we already have frontline workers ready to respond. Such is the case in Zambia, where our friend and partner, Thomas Simubali, is currently responding to a drought and subsequent famine. In the village of Simalundu, home to the Tonga people, a severe drought has put the lives of these people in danger. With the next harvest not until April of 2023 and their storage barns already emptied, this community in Zambia is in immediate need of support. One Kingdom is committed to providing enough support to carry this village into the next harvest. In order to do so, we need to provide roughly 1,800 bags of maize to be distributed over the next 9 months. A contribution of $50 to One Kingdom would provide 5 bags of maize for the Tonga people. The need is urgent, and our hope is to meet this demand as soon as possible. Our brothers and sisters in Zambia need your help. We are asking for you to partner with One Kingdom to fulfill this need. By giving today, you are meeting the needs of this community, but more than that, you are providing hope in the name of Jesus.
To give you some context, $50 will buy 5 bags of maize. Now, tonight, you may not be able to give us $50. You may be able to give us more than that or less. But I need you to know that any contribution that you make to One Kingdom tonight is going to go straight to our Africa Relief Ministry. So how can you do that? I know in church we're told to kind of put away our cell phones sometimes, but that's not what we're going to do tonight. So go ahead and take a minute to get out your cell phone, and I'm going to explain to you how you can support One Kingdom and Thomas if you feel so led to do so. It's as simple as texting. All right, so if you can text One Kingdom, that's the word One Kingdom all together with no space, to 77977, you'll be directed to our push pay, where you can then select from the drop-down Africa Relief. And you will know that any donation that you make today or in the weeks ahead will go directly to this initiative to help provide maize for Zambia. We're actually going to take a minute and give you opportunity to do that here tonight. And to anyone watching on live stream, you can do the same thing right now. Get out your cell phone, and if you feel so led, to 77977, text the word One Kingdom. So ladies and gentlemen, if you want to learn more about One Kingdom and our other initiatives, make sure you check us out at onekingdom.org. If you want to follow along with our relief efforts in Zambia, you can follow us on Instagram and Facebook. We would love your continued support in learning more about what we do. More than anything, I hope that you will pray, that you'll pray for Thomas as he tries to serve the people of Zambia. Pray for the drought to have some relief. Pray for the people there to have what they need. And above all else, continue to pray that the gospel will be shared in every nation and in every language. Thank you, and God bless.